Hey, welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. We have a really, really cool guest today. You know him. He goes by callsign Legend. I've interviewed Legend. This will be the third time I believe I've interviewed him. The first time I interviewed him, he was in Afghanistan. The second time was with Congressman Mike Waltz, who's now the National Security Advisor, and Commander Massoud, who's leading the National Resistance Front. And then, of course, this time, on the heels of interviews that he's done with Sean Ryan, Congressman Tim Burchett, and a range of other things. Legend and I have gotten to know each other a lot over the years, but I want to share a few things with you that you probably know about him, but I think just help inform the interview that you're about to watch. First of all, he is an Afghan American. His family immigrated here from Afghanistan during the first Taliban regime in the 90s. It was not a great experience for him. In a separate episode sometime, we'll talk about the journey that Legend went through as a young kid in America. It was not good. It was rough. And it really shaped him in a lot of ways to become the man that he is today. He joined the Army, the U.S. Army, right out of high school, and served in the Army, served tours in Afghanistan, both as a soldier, as a reservist, as a civilian, I believe even. And then when Afghanistan collapsed in 2021, he went back into Afghanistan. He went back in there to rescue family members and then pivoted into rescue of Afghan American citizens, of Afghans in duress. A lot of the volunteer groups that you see out there, he became connected with them and was on the ground actually helping people exfiltrate out of the country. And that's how he got to know so many people in our community. And he has continued to go back to Afghanistan since the collapse and has become very connected with the Afghanistan resistance at a very, very senior level. And as far as I know, he is the only U.S. Army combat veteran, Afghan American, who is also connected to the resistance that is putting itself between Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban and us. And I just want to leave you with this, is I asked Legend to come on the show, not because of his position as a supporter of the Afghanistan resistance, even though he founded the Vets for National Resistance Front. I asked him to come on the show because of his position and perspective as an American citizen, as a U.S. Army combat veteran. And look, when you watch this interview, you're going to see the connections and the social capital and the relationships that Legend has built are off the chain. And in this deep dive with Legend, you're going to see the strategic change he has affected because of those connections. I'll see you on the other side of the interview. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast, where we connect like our lives depend on it. Legend, it is awesome to have you with me again. You know, I don't know if you remember, but I think the first interview, or one of the first interviews you did on a podcast, was with me. It was shortly after the collapse in Afghanistan and after you got back, and it was on Zoom. Do you remember?
I was actually on the ground in country.
You were still in country.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, you were still in country.
Yeah.
And then we did another one. And we'll put the link to that. Because I thought that was a really compelling interview. And then we did another one with Massoud and you and Waltz.
Yes, sir.
Yep. And that was a really interesting one, too.
It was the first public discussion between a member of Congress, a sitting member of Congress, and the leadership of the resistance. All thanks to you, sir.
Yeah, I think it was a really good scene-setting discussion, and a lot of important things came out of it. I would remind people to just go back and look at that one, because there's a lot of stuff said that's still very relevant today.
Correct, absolutely. It just lays down what the expectations of the resistance is.
Yeah.
As Commander Massoud mentioned everything, and he also learned what he can expect from individuals like Colonel Mike Waltz, who's now the National Security Advisor.
And I think he was very candid about what expectations from the veteran community as well as the United States that are still in place.
Absolutely.
And I'll reference a few of those. Because I was in that room too, I will reference some of the things that I think this administration have made very clear, this new administration, and considerations, because I know folks from the resistance watch this and other Afghan friends, so I'll try to represent that as best I can, and the veteran community as well as you do. But one of the questions I wanted to lead off with is you and I have done a lot together since the collapse in Afghanistan. We met during the collapse or shortly after. You went on the ground, went back to Afghanistan and saved countless lives, to include not just your own family members, but Afghans in duress, American citizens, correct?
Yes, sir. And I would say I was a bit selfish. I went to get my brother out, my eldest brother.
Yeah.
I have several brothers, but the eldest one, he was a former NDS colonel in Afghanistan, an intelligence operative. And because of some issues with the Taliban, he was attacked and he became disabled. And so during the evacuation, he was basically the last immediate family member that I had, him and his family, children, my sister-in-law. And so I tried to get help from all the evacuation organizations that were here. I couldn't get any help, unfortunately. I reached out to the state, my former bosses in the military, my commanding officers, and sadly, no one could help.
Yeah.
And so I had no choice, literally, except to go there and try to get help on myself. And I did. But once I was on the ground, all of these veterans that I had never met prior, but I had reached out initially to ask for their help. They reached out to me after they learned I was on the ground. And that's what started this chain of, hey, help this family go from certain province to Kabul or from Kabul to Mazar. It moved on to members of congressional offices.
Yeah.
I helped Nebraska a lot with most of their cases. Some from New Mexico, California, some of the senators as well.
Yeah.
Their offices reached out, and many of the cases included Afghan Americans, no American citizen, American born, but Afghan Americans, citizens, green card holders, SIVs, many religious minorities, Christians. And so, including, I remember a funny incident. You and I were in Vienna sitting down with one of the Special Forces veterans, if you remember.
Yeah.
And he was talking about that one Christian family that he had evacuated. He was showing photos, and I recognized that photo. I'd taken that photo. I'd moved that family.
The work you did on the ground. I mean, we had, like Travis Peterson, some others did amazing work on the ground. The work you did on the ground
did great work.
Yes, was phenomenal. I mean, you were shuttling back and forth, at great risk to your own life. You had served, you yourself, an American citizen, an Afghan American citizen. You had fled the Taliban during their initial takeover.
A few years after.
Okay.
Yes.
But it was certainly a result of that, right? The first regime of the Taliban drove that.
Absolutely.
You came to the United States, went through your own challenges growing up in this country, joined the Army.
Yes.
Served in multiple tours in the Army.
Yes.
To include combat in Afghanistan.
Correct.
And then had to come back into the fray to help your family and then eventually help others. And that's where a lot of these connections and relationships that we have today came from.
Correct. All of it.
And I just want to, this is where I'm going with this, is the theme of this podcast is really connect like your life depends on it.
Like your life depends on it. Yes.
And how true was that during that moment? And in many cases, even now.
It's funny how things work. I don't know if it's destiny. I like to believe it's God. Just puts everyone in all these little positions. I would have probably never met you otherwise. Yeah. We served, I think, since I've known you for several years now, but I think I found out that you and I served in Afghanistan around the same time. Yeah. Colonel Walsh was also, when you saved his life, he was also in Afghanistan at around the same time. I was also in Bagram, worked out of Camp Vance a little bit, but we never met. No. But then all of these years later, Afghanistan connected us.
It brings us together. And such a powerful community of global war on terror veterans and, frankly, just volunteers that have come out of the woodwork, and then Intel alumni like Sarah Adams. It really is a very, very cool community of folks
it is.
That have really come together to try to deal with this problem set as best they can. And for several years, they've held the line in trying to help their allies, but also to be a voice for the resistance, to be a voice for standing against the gender apartheid that's happening there. But probably most compelling is to be a voice for what could potentially hit us at home again. Yes. The veterans have been the consistent voice on this, the global war on terror veterans, the Afghanistan war veterans. And I just want to say, you have really been at the forefront of that, in my opinion, not just as an Afghan American, but as a U.S. Army veteran who fought in Afghanistan. You have really poured yourself into supporting this message and standing up. Yes, you're standing up for Afghanistan. You've been standing up for America.
I do this for America. And the second order effect of that is Afghanistan and the freedom-loving people of Afghanistan. But I'm doing it for America. It's the right thing. I'm going to go back a little bit as far as the veterans and the intelligence community veterans. I'm telling you, sir, these are some of the most honorable men and women I've ever met.
Yeah.
They've sacrificed so much, and now they know what is coming at home. They know. Can you imagine the pain?
Yeah.
No one listens to them.
I've said this to some pretty powerful people, and I've said it on the news, and I'm going to continue to say it because I think it's the absolute worst manifestation of this is that another attack like that happens at home or an October 7 style attack, and the very men and women that fought this war for 20 years because they said never again on 9/12/2001 now tried to warn us, and it happens again. That, to me, is so devastating in terms of moral, yes, to the nation, but to the moral injury of these men and women who've given so much. Now, one of the things that we've done in our work is the play Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. We've traveled the country with it.
I've seen it twice.
I know you have. You've been a huge supporter, you and Jazz. You've followed us around to different shows. You've been always at our shoulder on it. But where I'm going with that is at one of the shows, it was in Franklin, Tennessee.
Yes.
Sean Ryan was in attendance.
You introduced me to Sean Ryan.
That's when little SF
What a
work
good
there.
man. He's a very good man.
He is a good man. And that's where you met Sean, and that took off in a whole different direction.
Yes, sir.
But, at the end of the play in the talk back, Jazz presented me and our cast with Task Force Pineapple with this flag.
That flag.
That is behind me right now. And it was a flag that has a lot of meaning, it evokes a lot of emotion, both for you and for me, and I think for people who see it, who know what it is. But, this was a flag that you rescued that was being burned by the Taliban at great risk to your life, along with a handful of others. What goes through your mind now as we've run the miles that we've run, we've done what we've tried to do here, and you see where we are? What goes through your mind as you sit there right now and look at that flag?
Honor, lots of honor. Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving it a home and just keeping it right there as the main thing right behind you. I feel proud. I feel honored that you did this. Felt the same thing when I went to the Congress and I saw a copy of this, another flag, which I gave to then Congressman Mike Waltz, Colonel Mike Waltz. His is also right next to his medals in his office. And so there's a few other of these as well. One I gave to General Joseph Votel, the former United States Central Command CEO, who was my first commanding officer.
Right.
When he was at 82nd, I gave him one, and then Sean Ryan has one, which I gave him on this show. The reason I gave it to you guys is because of the immense support you have not only shown to the veteran community and your continued support to try to stop the next attack against America, but for all the love and affection and support you have shown the freedom-loving people of Afghanistan. What I really wanted you guys to see is there are people in Afghanistan that because of all the sacrifices that you have made there, they consider you deep friends. I wasn't alone in recovering these flags. There were many other Afghans. I was the only Afghan American. But it just goes on to show you that we have a lot of friends who are grateful, even after everything that has happened. Yes, they are heartbroken, they're sad, but they will do whatever it takes to not only save their own country, but save our country in America as well.
And that's that's exactly how I feel. And I think it's the perfect place for us to pivot into a bit of a discussion on why are we doing this? I mean, you and I have had this conversation. There for both you and me.
Can I just say one other thing?
Yeah, please.
This happened, the flags that were being burned, this happened exactly a year after we left, when the Taliban were celebrating their first year anniversary.
Yeah.
This is one of the first things that they were doing. And then the State Department and many in the United States tells you that the Taliban are no longer a threat, that they're a great counterterrorist partner. The first thing they did is started burning American flags.
Yeah.
And they weren't just burning them. There was this song. I'll give you the video. Maybe you can attach it here. We recorded it. So there were...
And you were on the ground when this was happening.
Yes. I was watching it down below. I was only able to get a few of these out, but they were doing lots of them. They were burning Afghan flags, American flags, everywhere. They had these loudspeakers in the back of their pickup trucks, green former A&P pickup trucks, and they had this music that they had played, and I have it all on video. It says, it's in Farsi, it says, Marg, 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 Marg pa Amerika, means death to America. And then the rest of the music, it's just a song about how, about how horrible America is and how amazing their jihad was and how they're the victorious ones, selected, chosen by God, given this victory by God over us. You may think that the Taliban, not you, people here, they may think that the Taliban is not the enemy, but the Taliban don't view it like that. Their only enemy right now is America and the West.
Well, that's not what we're hearing, though. I mean, we're not hearing that at all. In fact, the outgoing administration was adamant that the Taliban are reformed, that they represent change in Afghanistan, and frankly, they were the primary partner for counterterrorism by the outgoing administration. Now, it remains to be seen how it will play out with the incoming administration. I think there will be change there. But I think it's important to speak to that. What is your perspective on the Taliban as a counterterrorism partner to the United States?
Well, how would you hear that the Taliban are no longer a threat? You're not collecting on them. The intelligence community collaborates with the Taliban. They don't collect on the Taliban. And so, I was going to say something.
I mean, let's just pull that apart, though. I mean, to the point, I mean, this is something I've hit with Sarah.
Yes.
I've talked about with other analysts. I've talked about it with leadership inside Washington, D.C., and I've talked about it with folks watching the show, which is this. The three-letter agencies made a conscious decision to walk away from the preponderance of their vetted and in-place assets and left it for other folks to pick up the phone and try to keep them alive. And as a result of that, they do not have trust or engagement at even the highest levels. And you know who the folks I'm talking about. Zero trust or engagement with these intelligence agencies that they've had for years. Now, I mean, and a conscious decision at the same time by these agencies to engage the Taliban only. Is that accurate or is that wrong?
It's entirely accurate, 110% correct. Excuse me. What I was going to say earlier is we have lost 98% of our collection capabilities in Afghanistan since the withdrawal, since August 2021. Whatever information that the agency or the rest of DIC gets comes from the Taliban. The Taliban won't report on their own deep cover operatives that they have sent to the United States. They don't report on the deep cover ISKP operatives that they have sent to the United States. They don't report on Al-Qaeda operatives that are already in the United States. They wouldn't do that.
Well,
We're not collecting against it. So the only alternative is working with the resistance, who's not only against Al-Qaeda, ISKP, ISIS, and Haqqani, but also against the Taliban. They have their own intelligence networks in Afghanistan operational. They collect on Taliban and all the other networks as well. Are we working with them as a country, as the United States, as the intelligence community? Absolutely not.
Not only are we not working with them, we have not worked with them since the collapse in Afghanistan and the abandonment and betrayal of a 20-year ally. We have not worked in any capacity with the various, and there are more than one, there are various resistance factions.
Yes.
To the best of my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there has been no substantive effort from the United States government to engage or work with on the scale that we're talking about, even just collaboration on an intelligence front, to maybe even just corroborate what the Taliban are saying, or, call me crazy, do some multi-source work to find out what the ground truth is instead of just taking Taliban information at face value. From what I can ascertain, there has been zero effort.
It's a lot worse than that, sir. I'll say two things. First, even on the political front, when the anti-Taliban resistance has host meetings and functions to come up to some solutions and unite the other leaders, whenever they go to Europe or host a meeting in the Central Asian region or anywhere, the State Department under former president, Mr. Joe Biden, they would dispatch a State Department official to discourage those host nations from hosting those events.
For the resistance.
So every time the resistance, for example, the resistance would go to Austria, State Department official would go right behind them and say, don't allow it. The State Department, same thing, all over the world. Everywhere the resistance goes for a political gathering, State Department officials go there and try to denounce it.
Okay, and then how would the State Department and USG handle a Taliban-sponsored gathering? Say, I don't know, Doha.
They're already meeting with the Taliban. The State Department meets with the Taliban. They just don't allow... Look, the State Department officials have denounced the resistance. They have literally denounced an armed resistance against Taliban, against ISKP, against Al-Qaeda. Miss Karen Decker, who's the current U.S. ambassador, who has been the U.S. ambassador for Afghanistan since 2021. She has literally denounced an armed resistance against the Taliban. She has said publicly that she will never support an armed resistance against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and any of the other terrorist organizations. Miss Karen Decker is literally acting as the unofficial First Lady of Mullah Haibatullah, the leader of the Taliban. She's in direct communications with every Taliban governor all over Afghanistan. She meets with representatives of the Haqqani network.
Even now?
Absolutely. Under this administration, she's still the U.S. ambassador for Afghanistan. In fact, I'll tell you something, sir. We have a very famous journalist in Afghanistan, Mr. Sami Mahdi. He currently runs the Amu TV in the United States, based in the United States. He had an interview with Miss Karen Decker, Ambassador Karen Decker, and he asked her, is the United States still looking for Sirajuddin Haqqani, who's wanted by the State Department, by the FBI,
the father
with a $10
of suicide
million
bombing in Afghanistan
bounty on his head, nicknamed father of suicide bombing, killed over 1,000 American service members.
Right.
Is the United States still looking for him? Is the State Department still, does that bounty still exist? She said she cannot answer any of these questions. She can't. She refuses to call Siraj Haqqani a wanted terrorist, a killer. I shared that message online once, and the then Congressman Mike Waltz picked it up, and he said, this is unbelievable. This is wrong. Haqqani is a cold-blooded killer. He has killed thousands of Americans, and he is a terrorist. But you have a State Department who refuses to call that man a terrorist. In fact, they meet with him.
So let's just take this a step further then, because I think this is really important, and we just need to have the conversation. I have heard from former peers who are still in the military, who are still in government service, who say the Taliban is a viable counterterrorism partner. They are committed to targeting ISKP, and that it's in our best interest to work with them in this capacity. I've also heard leaders from the outgoing and incoming administration saying, look, the Taliban that's who's in control of Afghanistan. We just need to deal with them. We need to work with them. What do you say to that?
I'll tell you two things. Now, that's what they say. I'll tell you what is really happening on the ground in Afghanistan. They do kill some low-level, very low-level, people that are not even relevant, low-level ISKP members. They do. But what they do, for the most part, is they kill members of the resistance. They kill members of the anti-Taliban resistance, such as AFF, Afghanistan Freedom Front, led by General Yassin Zia, the National Resistance Front, led by His Excellency Commander Massoud. They kill members of the resistance in battle or those that are supporters of the resistance, and then they report to the agency and say, we just killed 15 ISKP members. That's what they're doing. They kill little children, they kill women, and they say these are ISKP members. They burn whole entire villages down, and then they say these are ISKP bases.
Yeah.
Who on the ground is out there verifying this?
Right.
The agency is not on the ground.
Right.
Whatever the Taliban says, our government seems to believe it.
And Sarah has also stated from completely separate reporting channels that the reporting that is coming in through the three-letter agencies is sourced from the Taliban. Absolutely. And makes its way through all of it. So of course, the response is they're a partner. They provide us with solid intel. My question to you is this then. What is does the Taliban in its current capacity represent an existential threat to the United States?
The more I seem to talk about how this whole thing that the U.S. government has been doing for the past 4 years, the more I talk about this, the more some people, some leaders, they start believing that maybe I'm trying to drag the U.S. back into Afghanistan to go another 20 years of war. I'm not doing this. Here's what I can offer to yes, all of us. The last people that want to go back to Afghanistan are the U.S. veterans, the U.S. military, yes. And the last people that want us in Afghanistan are the resistance. The resistance, if Commander Massoud, His Excellency President Amrullah Saleh, and the rest of the Afghan resistance leaders, if they were not clear enough already, well, let me be very frank and clear. The resistance is not asking for the United States to come back to Afghanistan. They have the forces, they have the numbers, they just need support. They're not asking for the United States to return. But I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. If any of these leaders in D.C., any member of Congress, anyone in the IC that says Taliban is a good counter-terrorist partner, whether they be military, IC, Congress, anyone, executive level, I'll make you an offer. I will personally take you to Afghanistan. The resistance will personally take you to Afghanistan and show you what the Taliban are doing. See it for yourself. And then you come back and you decide whether the Taliban are a good counter-terrorist partner to America.
But do the Taliban in that capacity, do they want to just be left alone and allowed to govern the way, even if it's draconian in nature, they just want to govern, they want a governor? In other words, do they have a design on the West and the United States that is a threat to us? And if so, what does it look like?
The Taliban's jihad is not over, sir. It's absolutely not over, and they're not content with just the borders of Afghanistan. What the Taliban want is nuclear weapons, Pakistan's nuclear weapons. They want to expand westward. They want to expand the jihad north to Tajikistan, to Uzbekistan, to Turkmenistan, all the way towards Russia, and keep marching west all the way towards Israel.
When I talked with Commander Massoud in Vienna off camera, one of the things that he alluded to was that there has been tremendous amount of expansive efforts by Taliban surrogates in Pakistan and surrounding areas that are causing really big problems in regional stability.
Correct. Just look at it this way, sir. Taliban controlled Afghanistan. This emirate will be the capital. And this capital will have provinces. One of the provinces will be a nuclear Pakistan. Right now you have jihadists with nuclear weapons. Now this capital will have provinces that will border Russia. Right? This province, this capital, this emirate will have provinces going all the way to the Mediterranean. And then why not all the way west? Are they going to be able to achieve all of this? Maybe not, probably not, most likely not. But in the pursuance of their objective, their jihadi objective, will they kill thousands of Americans? Will they carry out suicide bombings? Whether they do it directly or through proxy surrogates, that's a different story. But will they be killing people here in America? Bring the battlefield right here? Absolutely.
And this is something that I think has to be discussed, is that if this notion of proxies and, changing brands and this chameleon-like behavior that they've become very adept at, it seems like we're always 5 steps behind, particularly considering how many of our assets we've abandoned. Our ability to actually look at the picture holistically and responsibly seems really challenged. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think we're tracking the proxy realities that at least Masood and others very senior in the resistance have warned me about, and that Sarah and other analysts have arrived at in their own analysis, which is this notion that the Taliban, even Al-Qaeda, are not going to be seen at the heart of anything. They've learned, they've evolved, they are adaptive, and they certainly are still connected to those very aggressive groups. It's just you're probably not going to see their fingerprints or their brand.
We're not 5 steps behind, sir. We're right there. We have already fallen for their tricks. Look at the case of Syria right now. Al-Jolani, the leader in Syria right now, former Al-Qaeda member, also former ISIS member, Islamic State, Iraq and Levant, Iraq or Syria, Iraq or Sham. They have several names and aliases. But wanted terrorist, FBI and state had bounties on him. He dropped his turban and put on a necktie and a suit. And the United States government, under Mr. Joe Biden, one of the last things they did is they removed that bounty from him, and they are pretending that that guy is an actual reformed leader. I rebranded there.
Yeah.
This is a joke.
Now, you have access to very senior leadership at
Here's
different
one
levels.
other thing I'll say. In Syria right now, there are Taliban fighters. And then we hear state and others in the U.S. tells us that the Taliban are not expanding. Taliban are in Syria. Taliban helped the jihadis in Syria come to power.
Yeah. The George Bush Institute has recently put out a document, and we'll put the link in here, on Taliban travel around the world. They're tracking it, independently.
Permitted by us?
It's permitted by us, the UN, that are supposed to have travel bans on them.
It can't happen without the blessings of the United States and the State Department.
So you're saying that there are Taliban in Syria?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Taliban are in Syria.
What about Gaza and that campaign? What have you seen there?
Maybe not there, but if they are there, they're deep cover operatives. They're not hanging out and walking around freely as they are in Syria. Not there. Excuse me. Sorry.
Take your time.
Not that much in the Mediterranean and Gaza, Israel region, but a lot in Syria, and they move around freely. Now, as far as the October 7th and stuff that happened there, we know for a fact that terrorists that attacked Israel on October 7th were trained in Afghanistan, in southern Afghanistan. Lots of their funding and weapons came from the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Right. It may be a surprise to some, but you won't be surprised. You and I discussed this. I told you about this months before the October 7th attacks.
I remember.
Yes. I know for a fact that you notified higher-ups.
I did.
Nothing happened. So even the annual threat assessments that the U.S. government does, they missed it. We didn't miss it. Why? Because we are not the Taliban. We collect on Taliban. We collect on the actual terrorists that are in Afghanistan.
So these same senior leaders that you engage with regularly in the various resistance groups, you and I have spoken recently about the threat in the U.S. Homeland.
Yes.
You've had inquiries come to you about it. Based on your best assessment, what do you think the presence of hostile operatives looks like in the United States originating from Afghanistan and that problem set? Do you have a swag at that?
I can tell you on good authority, sir, that there are over 1,000 Taliban and ISKP operatives in the United States. And that number does not include Al-Qaeda. That number does not include those in the diaspora who have been emboldened after the August 2021 withdrawal, that number does not include the sympathizers of the Taliban who are already in the United States. What I'm talking about, this number is just deep cover operatives, actual jihadists, known terrorists in the United States right now.
Speak to the capability of those operatives. What are we talking about? Are these amateurs? Are these, the guys that swung on the bad monkey bars in the training camps? Or what are we talking about here?
It's probably not wise to talk about their capabilities, because maybe those guys don't even know that we know who they are. But I will tell you, they have more training than I do. They have not more than you do, but a lot more than I do.
Okay.
In warfare, explosives making, tactics. Some of them trained by the United States.
And I want to point out, too, that this is a completely different derivative of reporting that other groups have brought up, talking about similar numbers, right? But the point here is that it is a significant number of operatives in the homeland, and this is coming from multiple sources. So my question to you then...
And it's not like there aren't new ones coming in on a daily basis, or at least that didn't come 2 weeks ago. 2-3 weeks ago when we had a different administration. The border was wide open.
Right.
They're getting passports issued by Siraj Haqqani every day. You and I spoke about this right when this thing started.
This is the same Siraj Haqqani, just to remind folks, that is known as the father of suicide bombing, who went on to become the Minister of Interior,
yes,
who controls the passport office. And there was a very special day every week at the passport office. What was that?
Every Thursday, Holy Warrior Day at the passport department.
Which is what?
Which is a day where jihadis from all different organizations go in and they get their passports, and the passport department is closed to the public.
So on Thursdays, if you are a terrorist,
a holy warrior,
as
they call it,
you can go to the passport office. There's nobody else competing for the line. You get your passport. So we're talking about not just an open border. We're talking about a day dedicated every week, 52 weeks for 4 straight years,
yes,
to get travel documents stamped that are completely legal.
Yes. Now, let's dig into this thing a little bit, if you would, sir. Passports. Afghanistan does not have the capability or capacity to produce its own passport booklets. Where is Siraj Haqqani getting these passport booklets from? Now, you're familiar with a passport. You travel all over the world. So there's a bio page on your passport with your photo and information. Afghanistan does have the capacity to print that.
Right.
Put the bio stuff. But the actual passport booklets are not produced in Afghanistan. They're produced in Europe, millions of them, with the explicit permission and blessings of the United States State Department under Mr. Joe Biden. They authorized it. Europe would print it. A company in Europe printed it, shipped it to Afghanistan, gave it to Siraj Haqqani, and he sold each one of these passports for average $2,000, but sometimes even more than that. But to those terrorists, he sells them. He gives them to them for free. Now, one other thing about Siraj Haqqani, the wanted terrorist, he's very close to Al-Qaeda. He's very close to TTP. He is very close to ISKP. In fact, the leader of Islamic State Khorasan province used to be a member of the Haqqani network, was a soldier under Siraj Haqqani. Now, Siraj Haqqani is a member of the Taliban, correct?
Wait a minute. I thought the Taliban were going
fighting
after
against
ISIS, right? What do you mean?
Correct. So the leader of ISKP used to be a soldier under the Haqqani network. Haqqani network is a cabinet member in the Taliban regime. Yet the United States under Mr. Joe Biden kept pushing this narrative.
But wasn't there also a New York Post or New York Times article about how Haqqani had changed?
Yes, there was. Now, who's behind all of those stuff? Who's behind this whitewashing campaign?
I don't know.
Zalmay Khalilzad and all of his friends at the State Department.
So tell us who that is.
Zalmay Khalilzad, the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, the man responsible for signing the Doha Agreement, the man who has been friends with the Taliban since 1996. In fact, Zalmay Khalilzad was the first man who brought the Taliban leaders to the United States, to Texas.
There's footage of it, isn't there?
Absolutely. There's photos of it.
Can we do this? I think we've taken
And
about...
one other thing. Now, Zalmay Khalilzad has been out of the government, right out of the State Department. During the Biden administration, he was not in office. He resigned. But he left somebody behind, Mr. Thomas West, who took over Zalmay Khalilzad's position. Mr. Thomas West is married to an Afghan woman. He speaks Pashto fluently. I believe he's even a convert to Islam. And he pushed the same exact narrative that Zalmay Khalilzad did. And Mr. Thomas West is no longer the U.S. ambassador. He actually left that position, and now he's hiding somewhere in the State Department's sanctions department, where there are rumors that he is working very, very tirelessly to remove Siraj Haqqani from the United States sanctions list.
Wouldn't surprise me. I guess my question is this. We've taken 30, 35 minutes to reestablish that there is indeed a Taliban design on the homeland, that there is a collaboration with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS, and that they are not content to just be left alone and do their thing. I wonder if we could take our remaining time to talk about, okay, what do we do about it? Now, we've had conversations about, and we will continue to do that with communities and individuals about what it means to them, best efforts at what it looks like if this manifests. But it's something you said to me last night when we were having dinner. You said, if we're fighting these guys at home, what? Say it. You can say it.
I don't want to cuss.
I don't care. Say it.
We're fucked. If we're fighting them here, it's too late. We're already fucked.
So let's spend our time now, and even if some of it is at policy levels, strategic levels, fine. But let's pull apart some things that could be done. Let's talk about the money. Let's talk about some policies. Let's even talk about, like you've brought up, constituents, the same tired names that have been involved with this thing, tied to the State Department and others. We have a new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He's made comments that when he learned that there were more hostages being held, American hostages, that this seemed unbeknownst to him. He alluded maybe there needs to be a bounty on the senior leadership that's higher than bin Laden's. So there's at least consideration of a new approach here. Let's talk about that. What should be thrown out into the public discussion here about what can be done so that folks watching this, whether they are policymakers, politicians, or citizens, can weigh in and start to look for responsible actions from the people that we elect and the people that are appointed. What are some of the things that we should be talking about so that we're not fighting them here at home?
Well, what the Honorable Secretary of State Marco Rubio should also take into consideration is you can put the bounties on the Taliban leadership, as there is a current bounty on Haqqani.
$10 million.
Correct. But if the United Nations Security Council does not gives waivers to these terrorists, they're still traveling.
Oh, you mean like lets them go to the Hajj?
Saudi Arabia. So Siraj Haqqani has been to Saudi Arabia twice. At one point, he was miles away from the United States military base, from a military installation, during one of his travels. And it's not only him. The other man that was traveling with him is Abdul Haq Wasiq, a former Guantanamo Bay detainee, terrorist, who now runs the GDI, the Taliban's intelligence. So that's one thing Secretary Rubio and the State Department should actually pay very close attention to. That's one. Two, I have a question, sir. How many times do we have to be right for somebody in D.C. to take notice and say, okay, let's talk? We were right about the money issue. They denied it. Everyone denied it. We exposed it, that the U.S., the Taliban were benefiting off of U.S. aid and other forms of cash that were going to Afghanistan. We were right about the October 7th attacks. We were right about the passports, which they denied, right?
Yeah.
And one other thing, which I just forgot, which you just actually mentioned, we were right about that as well. Can't remember it. If I remember, I'll tell you.
Sure.
But all of these times, we were absolutely right about everything. No one is still talking to us.
Well, I mean, Masood even makes a point in his book about his dad that when you are right about these things, you are likely going to be attacked. It's hard to be right before an event happens. And I mean, look at the hit piece that has happened on you in the media. Mm-hmm. Look at how they've gone after Sarah, how they've come after me. I mean, I'm not talking about rogue actors. I'm talking about institutional leaders who we served with and who we know and understand.
At the moment, we're not getting attacked. You and I are not getting attacked by the Taliban. Yes, there are threats, and we're aware of those threats, right? We're getting attacked by the United States government. It's the United States government that refuses to listen to us. That's the terrible part. That's the concerning part.
Well, both as veterans who are trying to provide a responsible perspective here, and the point that I keep coming back to is this isn't sitting on the couch making casual observations about what should be done on Monday morning after the game. These are, including yourself and myself, we answered the phone when our leadership consciously walked away from a 20-year ally and left smoldering ruins of a reemergence of a terror threat that evolved and came to fruition on 9/11/2001, and then we literally walked away from it, leaving our allies in the dirt. And for 4 years, we've been on the phone. You've been back to Afghanistan. You've engaged the most senior leaders in multiple resistance fronts who were once the partners of our most prestigious intelligence institutions.
Yes.
And this isn't stuff that's coming out of OSINT or, open source stuff. This is from the same highly vetted, highly respected assets that were abandoned.
This is from the father of intelligence in Afghanistan.
So
as the United States, sir, what is our plan B? Shouldn't the United States, as the sole superpower of the world, have a plan B?
For intelligence, you mean?
Correct. Plan A is, okay, there's this false narrative pushed by State Department that Taliban are great counterterrorist partners against ISKP, which we have exposed and said this is a lie. But they're not buying it. What is America's plan B? Why should America have only plan A? Where's our plan B? The resistance is plan B. The anti-Taliban resistance is plan B.
It also
we're directly connected with those leaders.
Yeah.
They are the plan B.
And it prevents
but they're
boots
not
on the ground.
connected with the United States.
It prevents American boots on the ground as well.
Absolutely.
But they are not connected with United States leadership. And that's one thing that we're suggesting as a potential change that the administration could consider at a high level is opening the aperture for increased engagement frameworks with the resistance fronts. Now, here's something I get back, and I want to share this because I think it's something that needs to be discussed, is I've actually had fellow veterans, people I respect greatly, say to me, Scott, this XYZ resistance front is talking to these people. They're talking to the Russians. They're talking to the Iranians. And, and it's like, we can't deal with them. And my response, and maybe it's the old fart Green Beret in me, is no shit. They're talking to them because we bailed on them. And they are completely surrounded by bad actors. They are completely under overt pressure every single day. I'm not excusing it. I'm simply saying it is a reality, a strategic reality, that when you exit a theater in that way and you leave the indigenous relationships in the dirt to be policed up, bad actors are going to police them up in a way that can be very complicated. But my point here, Legend, is that if that is what causes us to take a step back and disengage or not engage, that is so amateurish in terms of dealing with these kinds of threats, because we've always dealt with by, with, and through partner nations, resistance groups who have always been under pressure from folks that are acting counter to our objectives, but we outcompete that. But right now, there's no effort to outcompete anything. What do you say to that?
Do you watch movies?
Not really anymore, but sure.
I don't remember the name of the movie. I don't watch a lot of movies, but there's this one that I actually have watched. It's about this. It's a true story. It's about a man who works for the FedEx. His plane crashes and he is on a deserted island.
Castaway.
Castaway. What's the actor's
Collins
name?
Got it. Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, yes.
Great actor.
If you remember, there's a scene where he swims looking for a ship to come and rescue him, right?
Yeah.
Imagine Commander Massoud and imagine President Saleh and the Afghan leaders, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that's them. They worked with us for so long. They swam deep in the ocean for us, took so much risk, and now they're there like Tom Hanks is. And a ship comes, and that ship has the flag of, let's say, Russia, or the flag of Austria, or the flag of France. And these leaders, they say, oh, no, we're going to stay in the middle of the ocean and wait for an American flag. That's not smart. A drowning man somebody drowning in quicksand does not care whose hand is out there helping him. All he cares about is staying alive. So he's alive. He helps his people. It's not their fault, sir. We left them at a very terrible position.
We abandoned all of the moral high ground.
We have no right to tell them
we
what to do,
abandoned all of the moral high ground to make the assertion that you're working with people that we don't want you working with.
These people are so noble and these leaders are so good, even at this point, when they have absolutely zero reason to trust us after what we did to them, which led to their family members getting tortured and mutilated by the Taliban. I'm talking about the senior leadership, sir. They're still helping us provide information that could stop terrorist attacks in the U.S. about bad actors in the United States. And for some reason, we give ourselves the right to say, oh, why are you working with such country?
Yeah. And again, I'm not condoning the work. I'm simply saying, and I want to be super clear on this, for decades, we have outcompeted in those situations, and we have positioned ourselves to a point of relevance where you don't work with them anymore because we're doing this. And if we can't step back from that at a strategic level and look at the landscape of human terrain and see the Taliban's relationship with Haqqani, Haqqani's relationship with ISKP and ISIS, and the intermarriages alone that are happening between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda that reflect the kind of marriages that the Quds forces that happened with Soleimani. I mean, it is literally a mirror image of that. Like, if we can't step back and see that versus various disparate resistance groups that are admittedly in some type of collaboration with bad actors for certain things, and see the difference from a geopolitical context and what it means to our homeland security, what the hell are we doing? I mean, that to me, as a former operator who, could run the seams pretty well, but there's people a lot smarter than me at the helm, and I think, how in God's name could you even look at that and make any kind of moral equivocation on it? Like, it makes no sense. We've simply removed ourselves from the game, and we've used that as an excuse to not engage a relevant actor. Am I off?
No, you're not. America just packed up and left, and it can pack up, and it had every right to leave Afghanistan. But unlike America, Afghanistan does not have that luxury of packing and leaving the region. It will always remain Pakistan's neighbor. It will always remain Iran's neighbor, right? We have issues with Iran. Right reasons, right? They're attacking our forces all over. But Afghanistan does not have that luxury, right, that we do. They can't just pack up and leave. They have no choice to work, have some relationship with these countries that are bordered with Afghanistan. That's one.
Well, let me stop you there, man. Hold that thought.
Yes.
Can you remember it?
Yes.
All right. So
I'll try.
All right. This goes back to relationships. And, my mom, when we were little kids, my brother and me, we didn't have a lot of money growing up. She would take us, she would go shopping, and she might go look in a store that was like a glass store or something super expensive. And there was a sign always in those stores that said, you break it, you buy it. And I feel like they wrote it for my brother Travis and me. I swear to. And my mom, she would look at us, and you could tell. She's like, you break one effing thing in this, and I'm going to take it out of your hide. And so there was this, you knew that if you broke it, you bought it, right? And my belief is, if you go into another country, no matter how justified you feel like you are, you break it, you buy it, yes. Right? You incur an inherent obligation to work in that country and exit that country responsibly.
Yes.
And what has happened in Afghanistan, I don't even know how many times, and now we've become part of that line of actors, is this tail between the legs, irresponsible exit that follows us home. Because unlike Vietnam, where you exit wholesale, and yeah, it's ugly and terrible and people are jumping on, it doesn't follow you home.
Vietnamese weren't jihadis.
Correct.
Taliban are jihadis.
This follows us home. And how we could, we know this, right? It's not like we don't know this. It's not like we didn't experience 9/11 and everything that came out of the 9/11 Commission. Like, we know this, but yet we institutionally, consciously abandoned all of that knowledge and just walked away. And that's the part that I struggle with, and the relationships that we bailed on. This is about connect like your life depends on it. We abandoned these deep relationships that resulted horrifically in people's lives being lost and tortured, and we literally act like it didn't happen.
Sir, those from the Afghan perspective, from the Afghan side, the leadership in the resistance, in the anti-Taliban resistance, they have absolutely zero respect for some of these politicians in D.C. who did all of this. But they're not angry with the American people. They have the utmost respect for veterans, for military forces, for the IC that sacrifice right alongside them. Even those guys are just as confused as we are.
Right.
We don't understand how this makes sense. You cannot show me a single American family who says, yes, Taliban are amazing, we should be neighbors with them. Right. You can't find a single U.S. veteran that says, yes, let's deal with the Taliban. You can't find somebody worth their salt in the intelligence community that says, yes, Taliban are great counter-terrorist partners. They know. The intelligence community, the CIA knows that Taliban is the Afghan version of Al-Qaeda, that they're the Afghan brand of ISIS. They know this. This is not something we tell them.
I get so many emails from guys in the JTTF, Special Ops community, DOD, the CIA saying, keep going, because this is ridiculous.
They know. There's a story, right, which you shared not too long ago. You said you were on a ship and you asked a question. Please share that.
It was with the Special Forces reunion. Every year, it's an annual reunion. And we had somewhere between, it was over 500, closer to 1,000 Green Berets in the audience. And the members were all the way back to the Korean War, Vietnam, Cold War, Just Cause, Grenada, El Salvador, Iraq, Afghanistan. And I was talking about what we're talking about. And I asked them right out of the gate, how many of you think we're going to get hit with a terror attack in the next 18 months? Every hand in the room went up. And I thought I was ready for that. I thought I was. I couldn't speak. As I'm looking at the hands of all these Green Berets, who many of them know this enemy intimately. And they are really smart people. And they understand geopolitical context. And they understand second and third order effects of bad choices. And when every hand went up, Legend, that's when it really hit me. It's like, what have we done?
Now, here's my question to 350 million Americans, our fellow Americans. Who do you believe? Do you believe these veterans? Or do you believe Zalmay Khalilzad, who tells you Taliban are great counter-terrorist partners?
Well, I would ask that question of our new administration, too.
That question is for the new administration.
I'll throw it down. I don't care. I'll throw it down because, I know a lot of the guys and girls coming into the cabinet. I know where your hearts and your head is. But I'm going to throw that question down because we have to ask it. We have to ask it. President Trump has to ask it to himself. He has to look himself in the mirror, as well as the principals that work under him. We have to ask that question, because if our GWAT generation of warfighters who fought for 20 years are trying to tell us something, and if we don't listen to them, the consequences are catastrophic.
Sir, it's just un-American. There's nothing more un-American than for America to work with the damn Taliban. There's nothing more un-American.
What do you mean by that?
They're against every value that we have, every value that we share, everything that flag stands for, the Taliban are against it. Nothing is more un-American. It will be, if we look at America's history, 100 years from now, our grandkids, when they open history books, one of the most embarrassing chapters, one of the most disgusting chapters, humiliating chapters, will be the fact that Mr. Joe Biden in America, under his administration, paid the Taliban, worked with the Taliban, partnered with Taliban.
Can I go a step further?
Please.
I would say the only thing worse than that is if this incoming administration picked up any semblance of that continued plan. In my opinion, if it were to continue because you own it or you inherit it or you somehow think these guys can be managed, and even if we do manage them, I think we have to do it responsibly with other actors to include the resistance, with other folks that can keep this in check, because they not only do they have a draconian approach that runs counter to what we believe in as Americans, but it's the design they have on the homeland and the facade that they have pulled over our eyes of working with these other groups that I feel like we've got our head in the sand.
If this new administration does not change it, sir, personally, as a veteran, as an Afghan American, it will break my heart.
Yeah.
But professionally, it doesn't mean I stop. It doesn't mean you stop. It doesn't mean Commander Massoud and President Saleh stops. They know this enemy, and they will continue the fight. They have been fighting against the Taliban and all these other terrorist organizations without any support for 3.5 years. As you know, and you and I talk about this stuff on a daily basis, but a lot of your viewers may not know, the resistance expanded from one sub-valley, one small valley in Afghanistan, and now it operates in over a dozen different provinces. Right. Every day there are attacks against the Taliban. On an intelligence front, there's not a single thing that the Taliban do that the resistance is not aware of it. That ISIS does in Afghanistan and the resistance is not aware of it. Heck, we even track people that come to the resistance tracks, people that go to the West, go to Europe, to Latin America, to the Western Hemisphere. I'll put it like this. If a certain Taliban commander somewhere in Afghanistan wants to send a letter to Hibatullah in Kandahar, the leader of the Taliban, before Hibatullah gets that letter, President Saleh gets that letter. He reads it. And once that letter arrives at Hibatullah's office, when he responds, before the Taliban commander gets it, Commander Massoud knows about it.
So these guys have obviously, the resistance leaders...
Point is, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. And
everywhere.
And this gets to a point that's really important, because as we think about the Taliban, it's easy to make the assertion that when they took power in 2021, the Taliban are all powerful, they have control of that country. But there's actually some realities when it comes to the Taliban as a fighting force that are important for this incoming administration to know. Not because we want to put boots on the ground, but because we do need to understand that if your reporting source is the Taliban, you're not going to get an accurate disposition on how they actually are arrayed from a force structure perspective and capabilities. And there's some things about them that I think we need to know as Americans, right?
So basically, yes. Let's talk about Taliban force for a minute. In August 2021, on the day we left Afghanistan, America left, there were just under 65,000 Taliban terrorists all over Afghanistan. Today, as of right now, there are 217,595 terrorists in the Sirajuddin Haqqani's Ministry of Interior. There are 173,724 terrorists in Mullah Yaqub's Ministry of Defense. Mullah Yaqub is the son of Mullah Omar. Mullah Omar is deceased, he's dead, but he founded the Taliban. Now there are 47,305 members in Wasiq's intelligence agency, the Taliban's General Directorate of Intelligence. Wasiq, as you know, is a former Guantanamo Bay detainee, a terrorist that was released. At the same time, there are thousands of ISKP members. There are thousands of ISIS members and Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan in their own separate bases. There are thousands of TTP fighters. TTP is the Pakistani version of the Afghan Taliban. They're all there. One of the good things that just happened recently is because of the effects of what President Trump did, one of the first executive orders he signed was to stop the foreign aid. And on top of it, Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee, his efforts through H.R. 260, the No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act, these two things combined caused chaos in Taliban's economy. So $1 2 weeks ago used to be 66 Afghani, whereas today $1 is 84 Afghani. The Taliban are losing lots of money. In order to try to stabilize their failing economy, their terror financing economy, they auctioned off $17 million 2 weeks ago. A week and a half ago. It didn't work. Then they were forced to auction great, amazing US dollars. This time 19 million. It didn't work. Then they did it again, another time for 25 million. Altogether, they have already auctioned and let go of 121 good, amazing, valuable US dollars and purchased worthless Afghani currencies. But it's not working. Their economy is collapsing. If this thing continues, you will have a very weak Taliban, a broke Taliban that will turn against one another. The Taliban just announced 3 days ago, sir, that they are unable to pay the salaries of 400,000 of their terrorists for the next 3 months as a result of what President Trump and Congressman Tim Burchett did, right? If this thing continues, you will have a weak Taliban who will turn against one another. And the figures that I mentioned earlier that are over 400,000, a lot of these are not knee-deep in the Taliban. They're not hardcore Taliban.
Right.
They're just friends, cousins, brothers of an actual terrorist that they brought in after the collapse. So these are all new. These are the first ones that are going to run away. And then the Taliban will start turning against one another. Haqqani will start targeting them. Yaqub will target another one. They're going to turn against Mullah Hibatullah. And the intelligence ones will target others. It will be chaos. All we have to do is make sure that this thing passes, that the aid to Afghanistan that was sent under Mr. Joe Biden stops, that the 40 million weekly cash payments that were going to the Taliban stops, and that Congressman Tim Burchett's bill passes. Once that happens, I'm telling you, sir, within a year, you will see the Taliban crumbling.
And a special shout out to Sean Ryan and you for really bringing this out in the beginning, I think very early on.
You mean Sean Morgan?
Sean Morgan? Sean Ryan.
Oh, so you're not aware of that joke, Sean Morgan?
No.
So a few days ago, there was the FBI director nominee, Mr. Kash Patel.
Yeah.
He had this hearing at Senate, and one of the senators, Kash Patel was on Sean Ryan's show.
Right.
And so referring to that interview, one of the senators said, "You said this and this, Mr. Patel, on the Sean Morgan show."
Oh, that's right. He got his last name wrong. Okay.
Yeah, Sean Morgan.
Yeah.
We love Sean Morgan. I love Sean Ryan. He's an amazing human being.
It is. I think it's where it really started. I mean, the momentum for the petition and everything that really, I think, got Congressman Burchett's eye and started to move this forward. And so I hear you. And if we shut that funding down, that's going to have a profound effect. And by the way, a lot of you watching this had something to do with that. You called your congressional leaders, you put pressure. And so as we look at, let's just stay on the money a little bit longer. There was an article I saw, I think in the last 24 hours, where the Inspector General, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, he has made the assertion that this very specialized fund of U.S. dollars for Afghanistan that has been set aside, I guess, since the collapse, a sizable fund that has been just kind of held in reserve because the Taliban are sanctioned. He has said that the Taliban have no right to that money. Did you see that article in what we're I mean, I know you're well versed on it, but it's now out publicly that the Inspector General of Afghanistan is saying that they have no right to it. Now, that seems to run counter to some of the things that you've talked about that Zalmay Khalilzad, some of the banking leaders, and just some of the old nefarious names that keep coming up. That seems to run counter to what they're trying to do with this fund.
I'll make a bit, I'll be a bit fun about this. So Cigar John Sopko, great man, honorable man. I've never met him. I would love to meet him one day. Hopefully we can connect him to the anti-Taliban resistance leaders so he could get information from them as well. But John Sopko and Cigar got about $40 million, that's their budget, to tell the American people the same thing that you and I found
Been
for
saying
free.
forever. Yeah.
And for free. We
Yeah.
did not get $40 million from anyone to report the same things that Cigar reported. And we reported it early on. And our sources are the resistance leaders. And we can convince them to work with Mr. John Sopko. But as far as the money, which part do you want to cover first, sir? The trust fund, the Switzerland, or the 40 million weekly cash? We can talk about either. Which one do you want to talk about first?
Why don't we let's take 5.
Okay.
And then we'll jump what builds the right way. We'll go with weekly, and then we'll go into let's start with the weekly.
The weekly is fun. Yes.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Let's take 5.
Yes.
All right, Legend. We always, the money has become a big thing with the Afghanistan problem set. So I think we need to get, again, with the idea of, we've talked about the threat, now we're talking about things that can be done, right? So let's revisit the money issue, the 40 million or whatever per 10 days that goes in. What is the recurring reality with the money going to the Taliban from the United States, and what should we know about it?
So, great question, sir. First of all, there's a lot of misinformation out there too, and not a lot of misinformation, a lot of gaps. So I'll just break down how this money thing leaves America and how it ends up in the pockets of the Taliban, if you let me.
Sure, please.
So it's $40 million cash printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in the United States, in the East Coast. Money is loaded, cash, United States dollars, $100 bills. It's put on planes. The plane flies to Iraq in the city of Soleimania, where the cash is unloaded, put in charter planes, and those flights land at Kabul International Airport.
Planes loaded with cash.
Correct. So now the money is at Kabul International Airport. Sirajuddin Haqqani, he arranges for a armored convoy, 11 to 13 vehicles. And they pick up the cash. Cash is loaded in the back of these vehicles. And then these vehicles drive to the headquarters of the Afghanistan International Bank. Not a Taliban bank, a decent, normal bank, Afghan bank. AIB, Afghanistan International Bank, it receives the cash, but it does not have the authorization, permit, or ability, or the authority to convert the state dollars to Afghanis. As you know, in Afghanistan, you can only buy in Afghanis, not in dollars. So what AIB does is they send the money to the Taliban-controlled Central Bank of Afghanistan, also known as DAB, D-A-B, the Afghanistan Bank. Now, the DAB, the Afghanistan Bank, is managed by a man whose name is Nur Ahmad Agha. Nur Ahmad Agha is a sanctioned terrorist, sanctioned by the United States for financing IED attacks against American soldiers and Afghan soldiers that killed American and Afghan soldiers. He used to finance those attacks. He runs the central bank. He receives the $40 million cash. Every week, he calls for a gathering. This is in order to auction the dollars to Afghanis. He invites individuals that are involved with the Hawala system, those individuals that have money exchange licenses, permits. He invites them. Those people that he invites are all friends with the senior leadership of the Taliban, or they are Taliban themselves, or they are very close to the Haqqani network, or they are members of the Haqqani network. He invites them, and they start bidding. They hold a live auction where the Haqqani ones will say, I'll buy $1 for 64 Afghanis. The other will come and say, I'll buy it for 64 and a half or 63 and a half. And so that's how the auction works. They bid. The winner consistently since 2021 has always been, for the most part, individuals affiliated with the Haqqani network, as you know, a terrorist organization. During this conversion, they make between $1 to $3 million profit, cash in dollars, during the conversion. Once the conversion is done, they deliver the money, the Afghanis, back to the Afghanistan International Bank, the AIB. Now money is at AIB. AIB deposits the money into the bank accounts of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations. There are 278 international NGOs operating in Afghanistan, and there are nearly 3,000 now Afghan NGOs operating in Afghanistan. These 3,000 NGOs came into existence after the United States left. You have a nonprofit, sir.
I do.
An NGO 501c3. When you opened your organization, you had to go to the state of Florida or the Secretary of State, and they give you a 501c3 tax ID number, right?
Well, and you also have to get it from the IRS.
From IRS, right? And so they gave it to you, and now you're a charitable organization.
Correct.
An NGO. Now the individuals giving out these 501c3 statuses in Afghanistan are the Taliban. So if Scott Mann goes to Afghanistan right now and says, hey, I'm a lieutenant colonel, Green Beret former, I fought against the Taliban, I want to help the Afghan people, they're not going to give you a license. If Mullah Haibatullah's friend goes to that same office and says, I want to open an NGO, we used to do jihad together, they get their licenses. So most of these NGOs are Taliban funds. They're Taliban-friendly NGOs. Their licenses, permits were given to them by the Taliban. The Taliban, again, will not give any license to anyone that is against them.
Because to be clear, Secretary Blinken, in testimony, his response to this aid was that they went to NGOs.
Correct. And he's right. The money does go to NGOs. But he never said that these NGOs are all Taliban funds and that their licenses were given to them by the Taliban.
Relationships, right? Connect like your life depends on that.
Absolutely. Very good point. So now the NGOs have the money. Now here's the fun part. We haven't even gotten to the fun part yet, sir. The NGOs get the money. Now these NGOs have to buy goods and services. They have to buy beans, rice, oil, medical devices, medicine. Some of these things are locally produced in Afghanistan, and others they have to order from abroad, from, in reality, from UAE and several other countries. But let's focus on UAE as for an example now. What the stuff that these NGOs buy from Afghanistan, they buy it from a list of pre-approved vendors. Now, they buy in bulk. They will buy 10,000 kilos of rice from a store that is provided to them on a list by the Taliban. Taliban pre-approved vendors.
Right.
Now, Taliban, once again, the individuals, the companies on that list as vendors are all vetted by the Taliban, approved by the Taliban. A lot of those businesses are owned by the Taliban. Or they give a cut to the Taliban. Or the Taliban know for a fact that at the end of the year, they will pay their taxes.
So there's a percentage coming to them just from that.
That's how they make profit. Now, that's for the material they have to buy in Afghanistan. Now, there's also, as I said, stuff that they have to buy from UAE. Mm-hmm. Now, in UAE, you cannot buy in Afghani, but you can buy in dollars. So now, once again,
another conversion
happens, and then the money is transferred through Azizi Bank to UAE. Azizi Bank is a Taliban front bank, and we can get into Azizi Bank. We can table that for now. But Azizi Bank moves the money. Obviously, they take they charge fees, and they move the money to UAE. The NGO orders medicine and stuff from UAE. They buy it. They fly it on planes to Kabul airport, paid with dollars. As soon as that shipment lands at Kabul airport, the Taliban charge taxes, customs and duties. That's how they make another profit.
So it's multinodal percentages that they get along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. They make profit along the way in every step. Now, the aid comes in Afghanistan, Taliban charge customs and dues and fees. And then the bulk, the medicine, the rice, everything arrives at the NGO. Then the NGO distributes the aid. Now, I'll give an example of America once again. If there are poor people in Florida, homeless veterans, anyone, who need aid, who need government assistance, they go to the Department of, Health and
or Veteran
Human
Services or Human Services.
Health and Human Services, right? They go there, they say, hey, we are American citizens, we don't have money, we can't pay the bills, please help. In Afghanistan, we have something similar. That office is run by the Taliban. So now you have 10 Afghans from Kabul. Let's focus on Kabul. You have 10 poor, hungry Afghans from Kabul that go there and say, hey, you claim to be in the government. Yes, you're Taliban. We don't like you, but you say you're government. We're citizens of this country. Please give us aid. Those 10 are added on the list. Then you have 50 Taliban fighters, right? Former families of suicide bombers will go and say, Mr. Taliban, remember you and I killed, my son was a suicide bomber and he killed 3 Americans because you guys told him to do it. And we killed 15 Afghan soldiers because you guys told us that they were infidel and proxies of America. Our son is dead. We have no one to provide for us. Give us aid. Those Taliban families, suicide bombing families, are added on that list. You have Taliban commanders, Haqqani members, who want free rice, who want free oil, free medicine, free everything. Why would they buy it if they can get it for free? Those members, their names are also added on that list. That list of the needy, hungry Afghans are given to the NGOs by the Taliban. That's how the NGOs...
And there's no responsible oversight on the ground from the United States as a donor or any implementing partners to ensure that it's distributed in the way that we would want it distributed.
Correct. So the NGOs don't pick and choose who they give the aid to. The list of hungry, poor Afghans is given to them by the Taliban. And on that list, what I'm saying is there could be 10 poor and hungry Afghans, but then there are 90 Taliban and Haqqani would-be suicide bombers, suicide bombing families, and all these other bad actors.
And to be clear, you've been on the ground with the distribution of this aid, and you've told me that this stuff is not reaching the preponderance of those in need.
I'll give you an example. In Bamiyan province, the Taliban don't have a lot of support. They don't enjoy popularity or support in Bamiyan province, as you know. So in Bamiyan, the Taliban's intelligence operatives, GDI, they would go with NGOs and distribute the aid. So you have a Taliban GDI officer and the NGO official distributing the aid together. Mr. Saleh, President Saleh, he exposed this. His organization exposed this, revealed photos, everything. Right after that, the Taliban banned photography and video and any recording at when the aid is distributed.
Yeah.
Now, in other areas, such as, let's talk about Panjshir, for example. Panjshir Valley, Andarab Valley, and elsewhere in the north, where Taliban have historically had zero support.
Yeah.
The public in Panjshir, they're anti-Taliban. They're anti-terrorism, and they have fought terrorists since they came into existence in Afghanistan. Now, in Panjshir, there's an organization, an NGO called Ansar. Ansar goes to Panjshir, and the Taliban gives Ansar a list of 100 Panjshiris families who are hungry and poor. None of these people, as you know, are Taliban. They're all pro-resistance. They're sympathetic towards the resistance. They're anti-Taliban. Now, here's what the Taliban intelligence and Ansar does. They say, Mr. Panjshiri, during the days of the Republic, did anyone come and bring you aid and cash? You know, they have envelopes with $200-300 in there distributed by Ansar with some Afghani in there. They distribute. Did anyone give you this money during the Republic? They say no. And then they tell the Panjshiris, so long as you don't resist against us, Mullah Haibatullah is going to continue to send you aid and cash because he loves you so much.
So they've weaponized it.
This is how they consolidate power. Now, that villager in Panjshir and Andarab Valley and elsewhere, A lot of these people cannot even write their names.
Right.
They don't know how this aid comes. It's U.S. tax dollars. They don't know this. The U.S. aid is not distributed by the Taliban or these NGOs in the name of the generosity of the American people.
No.
They distribute the aid in honor of Mullah Hibatullah.
And in a way that's weaponized to their strategic aims.
In Africa and Latin America and elsewhere around the world, when the United States sends shipments of aid and wheat and rice and flour, there's an American flag on the bag.
Yeah, from the American people.
Not in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. They do not want people to know that this aid comes from the generosity of the American people. It's American taxpayer money. They say this aid comes from the leader of the Taliban for the Afghans that he loves so much.
So let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
You know, it presents a problem in the sense that, you know, the you cut the money off. It does impact the Taliban, obviously, and their strategic capacity. But there is at least a humanitarian component to it, and there is a need for some kind of humanitarian aid. My buddy Yanni points this out, that it's going to be a needle that we have to thread. But I've heard you say, I've heard Masood and Saleh and other very senior resistance leaders say, why not just conditionalize the aid around something like a constitution where the Afghan people can choose. I mean, Masood has even said to my face, he said, if the people choose the Taliban, then so be it. But why not look at some kind of, as a matter of policy or diplomacy, to conditionalize this aid in such a way that the Afghan people have a vote, they have a constitution, and they decide their future, and the aid is tied to that.
That's a brilliant
Is that outrageous?
idea. No, it is not. It's a brilliant idea. In fact, if we had done this in 2021 and said, hey, we want to support our allies in Afghanistan, the Afghan people. We want to make sure America is a very generous country, sir. This is something that has made America America. We take care of people everywhere. We should be taking care of more people at home, but what makes us great is we help people everywhere. So why not conditionalize the aid?
And to be clear, I am coming at this with a humanitarian angle, but at the same time, this is also about dealing with a rapidly reemerging terror threat.
Yes.
Like one of the fastest ways to mitigate this, to depower it, would be to conditionalize money that we're just handing over to a bad actor, and instead put the power back in the people to make a choice, and then conditionalize the aid based on that choice.
If we distribute the aid and put American flags on all of the aid that goes there, the people will know that this is America giving us aid. Those people will continue to love America. As of right now, they hate America because they say America doesn't send us any aid, anything. America left us in this terrible situation, and now the Taliban are so amazing because they give us aid.
There's a lot of, I'm going to pivot a little bit here, Legend, but I think we've made the case for options with the revenue. There's a lot of people who tell me, they say, well, the NRF does not have the interests of this segment of the Afghan population in mind. They are just this. Or the NRF is under the control of Iranian Quds forces. Or, this particular resistance group is only in it for themselves. In other words, there's still to me, as a veteran, when Mike Waltz, when we first did our podcast together, he said, one of the things that the veterans of America and probably the United States is going to insist upon is some kind of unity within the resistance groups to stand against the Taliban and other nefarious actors. And, for my own part, I have seen some division still between the groups, but I've also seen unity. And I guess what I'm saying is, as a veteran who fought in that war, I don't support any one resistance more than another. I believe that the resistance as a movement it's going to be led by women. It's going to be led by former commandos, the son of Ahmed Masood. I think there's a design for this diversity of people who have had a taste of freedom. And I think it's very possible and could happen. But I think the unity of effort is going to have to be there. And if resistance fighters want the veterans of the United States and NATO to continue to sound off for them. I think that's going to have to be part of it.
I'll say a few things there. First of all, I consider you as one of the smartest men that I know in my life.
You need to get out more.
I do, actually. I've still come to that conclusion. And you met His Excellency Commander Massoud in Vienna. You spent lots of time with him, as did our very close brother, Sean Ryan, our good friend. I know you assessed him. Do you think he's a Quds agent? Or
No.
do you think he's an Afghan agent?
I think he has the interest of the Afghan people foremost in his heart. Like,
Yes.
that's where his heart
and
is.
he cares about humanity everywhere.
Yep.
The freedom-loving
Yep.
people everywhere. He wants to save not only Afghanistan, but he wants to prevent attacks and save lives in America, in Mexico, in Canada, everywhere, right? He's an Afghan. He's not a foreign agent. He's a very good man. He's a humble man. Now, everything else you said after that, as far as unity, as far as making sure that we support women movements, that they are leading a resistance, making sure we have support President Saleh and other resistance leaders. You know who says the exact same thing to me that you just said? Commander Massoud. He says, yes, you should support the women. Yes, there should be unity. Yes, they are united. A lot of these organizations, and I'm connected with most of them, sir, it's not like they're fighting against one another. They all agree that the enemy is right there in front of them, and that name of that enemy is the Taliban. The name of that enemy is ISKP. President Saleh told me this once. He said, there is no competition. There is no competition here. Everyone is united in the resistance against the Taliban. A lot of these people have taken different routes towards that goal, right? One is leading intelligence, one is leading battle, like General Khalid Amiri, the main battlefield commander in the NRF, a very humble man, very brave man. He's taken a different path. President Saleh has taken a different path. Commander Massoud has taken a different path. But they all lead to the same place.
Yeah.
Now, I agree. If you tell me there needs to be more unity. I agree. Now, here's the thing. As the United States, have we given them anything? Have we given them a platform so all of these people could be united? Vienna, for example, right? You have several Afghan leaders that show up there, but there are other Afghan leaders who would like to be there, but they're not allowed by the Europeans. So imagine this. In an ideal world, this is how I would love to see this thing happen. If we give the Afghan embassy that belongs to the Afghanistan's people, it belongs to the government of Afghanistan, the legitimate government of Afghanistan in Washington, D.C. If we hand this over to the anti-Taliban resistance tomorrow, and the United States Secretary Marco Rubio allows all of these Afghan leaders, right, that we want them to unite, allows all of them to come to America, do you think these leaders will not come at the Afghan embassy here and unite and talk about joining forces so they could go together against the Taliban? See, we're asking them to unite, but we're not giving them any tools to do that. We're not giving them a platform.
And I agree. I want to be clear here. I have no moral high ground to stand on because of how we left that fight, and how we left that campaign. I guess maybe I'm reflecting back some things that I think are going to have to be addressed, but to your point, and I think this leads to my kind of second to last question, is that there does need to be, in my assessment, some type of diplomatic political recognition of the resistance forces.
Correct.
First, at a minimum, and an engagement, a meaningful, responsible engagement with these groups as an antibody, not just to the Taliban, but to violent extremism in that country and things that are running against our interests at home, gender apartheid, a whole range of things, right? But if nothing else, to keep the homeland safe. If hopefully we've made that case, what would you say to Secretary Rubio? Because I've heard, I don't know him. I don't know right now the character collectively of the State Department as this new administration comes in. I think it'll take some time to see where they go. But I do think the State Department sets the tone for policy engagement and diplomacy, and certainly it's a reflection of President Trump's vision. But what would you say If you were sitting right here right now with Secretary Rubio, and you had a chance to lay out for him some thoughts that might inform his diplomatic policies with Afghanistan and with the resistance, and as he thinks about the Taliban, what would you tell him?
I think His Excellency President Donald Trump is a very smart man. He appointed a very smart individual to run the State Department. A few years ago, in case you didn't know, sir, Senator Marco Rubio at the Senate, he proposed a bill, a legislation to designate the Taliban as a foreign terrorist organization, which in the past 20 years is something we failed to do. He proposed it. It didn't go anywhere because the Republicans did not have majority in the Senate, and Senator Marco Rubio was asking Secretary Anthony Blinken to designate Taliban as an FTO. Well, guess what? God has put Secretary Rubio in a role now where he is the one who makes that decision. So all I would tell Secretary Rubio is to do exactly what he initially himself attempted to do.
Do you think if the invitation went out to various members of the resistance factions, groups like some of the female leaders of the resistance, that are abroad, Saleh, Masood, would they come? Would they come to the United States, and would they make that case?
I think if the invitation is sent out to His Excellency Commander Masood and His Excellency President Saleh and other Afghan leaders, including women leaders, I think they will consult amongst themselves and they will discuss it with the people of Afghanistan. And I absolutely see no reason why they would not. These leaders, sir, they have been given it's not even up to them whether they decide. It's not a personal thing for them. They have no right. The Afghan people have the ultimate right. The people have given them this mandate to bring peace, to defeat the Taliban and defeat terrorism, and bring back freedom and the ability for the people to choose their next leader and decide their own future. It's not up to them to not come to America. The people of Afghanistan will demand that both of these leaders and all of them, all the women, they do go to America and they do engage with the United States government.
And just a reminder that on Sean Ryan's show, he started a petition after speaking with you and after speaking with Masood that requested Masood come to the United States and testify. And we've since made the case that it should be Saleh and others. There were over 300,000 signatures on that petition, and
actually,
many of them veterans.
It's a lot more. It's just 300,000 on one platform.
Yeah.
It's a lot more. I'll tell you a few things about that petition, sir. It is throughout the history of Afghanistan and our relationships with the United States, there has never been a petition that has gotten this much traction related to Afghanistan. So it goes on to show you a few things. You know, when you hear terms like war fatigue, the American people are not interested in Afghanistan, they don't care. It's fake news, sir.
Yeah.
If the American people did not care, you would not have millions of signatures on these documents.
It's also fake news that there's nothing that you can't do anything about it, because clearly you can.
Yes, you would not have millions of people writing to their members of Congress that, hey, that you need to support the anti-Taliban resistance and not send another penny to the Taliban. If the American people did not care, the Republican Party right now would not have won the House, the Senate, and the executive, the White House.
So my last specific question to you.
Yes, sir.
It's kind of a contentious one.
You're making me nervous, sir.
No, I think your perspective is really valued on this. There's a lot of discussion, and there has been for the last 4 years, on evacuation of Afghans from Afghanistan, whether they were commandos, other soldiers, police, diplomats, lawyers, SIV, P1, P2, and a lot of these are friends of yours, friends of mine. You evacuated people. I evacuated people. I have friends who are here now that I served with in Afghanistan whose families are still over there, and they're trying to get their wives here. There are Afghans who've been gravely wounded or who are so on the run that they can't show their face, they can't care for themselves, and they're literally being cared for by many of these veterans and intelligence alumni who have, like Ben Owen, cashed in their kids' college fund. They are operating off their pensions. I know a volunteer who didn't serve in the military, but he has wiped out his entire savings and is suffering mightily a moral injury that he's had execution videos sent to him. And I know you and I've had this conversation, and I know there are hard choices in it, but what I'm calling out here is that our veterans, for the most part, were called upon to do something after they had served very honorably, after they had tried to make their peace with this war, after they had tried to come home to their families. I mean, I lost a friend who had fought so hard to get sober and put his life together. He sponsored this play. That Wall of Honor behind me was in Brandon, Mississippi, where he lost his life to this years after coming home from the war because he could not handle the betrayal. So, I mean, there are so many people who are just, their hearts are breaking from this, and they have invested everything they have in trying to save just one more, and it's become all-consuming. And so now here we are, 4 years later, a new administration, new policies on immigration. It has caused a range of consternation and pain in the veteran community, in the Afghan community, because there's now delays in P1 and SIV. What the hell are we going to do about mass evacuation 4 years after this war has ended? How do we even think about this? How do you think about this in terms of evacuation versus resistance?
You know, sir, as I said earlier, some of the most honorable men and women I've ever known in my life are those I saw after August 2021 and their efforts in Afghanistan. During the evacuations, it was a very chaotic moment. No one was prepared for it. The right thing to do at that moment was save people's lives. Whether the government supported us or were against us, no one cared. Ben Owen. I love Ben Owen, Jess, and their daughters, their kids. Ava has become a friend of mine. Their young kid, their young daughter. Very honorable Americans. They did everything. Ben Owen has adopted an Afghan daughter.
Yeah.
These are some of the most honorable men and women I've ever met in my life, sir. And they should all be proud of the fact for what they did. They should all be proud of it. They helped. My father, God rest his soul, he passed a long time ago. When I was very young, one of the things I remember from him is he told me, I'll give you advice. Advice is like a piece of paper. Fold it, put it in your pocket. One day you may need it, but if you don't need it, throw it in trash. There's no right or wrong answer here, sir. I'll give you the way I look at this. I'm still very much involved. You know, as involved people were, Americans were during the evacuation. Well, I've been that involved and even more so since then. So I'll tell you how I look at this evacuation versus resistance, and it's up to the people whether they take my advice or they just throw it in trash. But at the minimum, they should just listen to it. 8 million people have left Afghanistan since the Taliban came to power. 8 million. Nothing has changed. There are 20 million women in Afghanistan right now imprisoned. You're not going to be able to evacuate them. You're not going to be able to evacuate them, and you can't evacuate 40 million people. Let's not insult the Afghan people and their military and their sacrifices by making this a very small and tiny matter and say, well, those people were our allies. The interpreters were only our allies. No. 97% of the people in Afghanistan did not pick up a weapon to kill any American when Americans were there. Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS were asking them to kill Americans. They refused. They were our allies. The entire country was our ally, sir. We cannot evacuate 40 million Afghans. We cannot. It's impossible. That's one. Two. Let's say if miraculously we do. We bring all of them here. What message are we sending to anyone, the rest of the world? We're literally giving the country to the Taliban. Every soldier we evacuate right now, it helps the Taliban. Yes, it helps us, gives us some peace, but it helps the Taliban because now there's not an operative to fight against that Taliban. right? Passports. Every evacuee, every person you encourage or promise an evacuation to, or the mere fact that you're talking to them as an American, the moment they hear somebody talking in English, it gives them hope that, oh, I'm about to get evacuated. Yes, things are tough in Afghanistan. The first step in evacuation is Tazkira, ID card, passport. Both of those things are issued by Sirajuddin Haqqani, who has killed thousands of your brothers and sisters and thousands of their brothers and sisters. Every time you encourage evacuation, you promise an evacuation, these people, they go, they apply for passports, they apply for Tazkiras, enriching the Haqqani network. And Haqqani network is not going to take that money and make a basket of roses, right? He's going to use that money and kill more Americans, more Afghans. So evacuations, it has already helped the Taliban. The United States government made deals with the Taliban in the past 3 years under Mr. Joe Biden in order to get flights out. They paid them to allow these flights to come out. Evacuations is the reason, the continued evacuations is the reason why we've basically kind of legitimized the Taliban in order to work with them. Evacuations are enriching the Haqqani network in Taliban right now. And again, there are folks that are lobbying to evacuate commandos, intelligence operatives, Afghan soldiers, commandos, tactical teams, pilots, the very individuals that are needed to save the 40 million people that you cannot evacuate, right? When you come and you tell me that, hey, these people were our allies, they stood next to us and they fought bravely and now we have to evacuate them, you're really insulting their service. Just think about it. These people did not take the oath that I will defend the Constitution and the people of Afghanistan in order to get a U.S. visa, in order to get evacuated and move to Houston. They did it for the people of Afghanistan. They're still needed. The people of Afghanistan still exist. They're still in need. Those soldiers that you want to evacuate are the hope of those people.
And it's such a difficult conversation. I mean, it's a very emotional conversation. I know when I've had these conversations, because it is a wicked problem, but there are, I'll just add one other thing to it that I struggle with. I get all requests all the time on social media, outreach. Hey, I did this, this, and this when the U.S. was here. I'm stranded or I'm in duress. But the reality is now I don't know the state of that individual. I don't know if it's even the individual that he's claiming to be. I don't know if he's being handled. I don't know anything about him. So much time has passed that just, and I hate to say it this way, but as an American service member, veteran, who has an inherent obligation to protect the homeland, I can't say with certainty that any renewed or new engagement that I have with an Afghan citizen over digital comms is safe or does not pose a threat to the homeland. And I know that's not a popular statement, but I can't say that. Like, I can't say that with certainty.
Well, you need to be careful with what you say, sir. They may accuse you of being Islamophobe and anti-immigrant and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you're saying tough things. Now, look, I am an American. I am an immigrant. I came to this country 20-something years ago. This country took me in. I'm not against immigration. I'm not against people coming here, especially other Afghans who I know are in need. And these are very good people, sir. Like I said in the beginning, this is a very tough question. This is very hard. They're both hard choices. Look at Nasser Ahmad Tawhidi, the man who wanted to kill Americans, us, our own people, on election day.
Yeah.
He had been vetted, right? CIA evacuated him to Afghanistan. That's the risk. That's the risk. You bring them here, you will have bad actors. You don't know who a lot of these people are. 3 years, as you said, after all of this, Taliban controls them.
I guess
they may be handling them.
I guess my question is, at some point, I mean, how does this end? Do we, as you said, do we evacuate the entire Afghan former military? Do we evacuate all interpreters? I mean, I'm trying to get my head around. Or does the conversation at some point shift towards a wholesale support of a resistance, of a viable entity that can stand up with a constitution behind it, the will of the people, conditionalized aid from the United States, a narrative from the GWAT veteran population that is loud and adamant about political support and other forms of support to a resistance and a constitution? I mean, is it possible to shift the conversation where we are still advocates as veterans and military family members and volunteers of a new direction in Afghanistan, or are we forever bound to an evacuation narrative?
Well, we'll be bound to it if we choose. Look, as your fellow veteran, as your fellow American, my advice to you is this. Look, you can keep doing this and it will never end, right? Or in an ideal world, what I would really love to see is these veterans who move so fast, they're able to accomplish things that institutions fail, the government can't. They move so rapidly. If in an ideal world, what I would really love to see is all of these veterans, all of these Americans, Gold Star families, all of them, the volunteers, they're already united. They're already on group chats. Move from evacuation to encouraging support and diplomatic support or material support for the resistance. And here's what all right, so you can go and advocate and to save one Afghan life, or all of you can collectively come together and save the entire country. Save 40 million Afghans. Doesn't require evacuation. You don't have to take that risk of the next Tawhidi in Oklahoma or the one in San Diego that was just arrested with links to terrorists. You don't have to take all of these risks, and you're going to be helping the 20 million women in Afghanistan and all of these things, and saving those boys who are in the jihadi madrasas right now. You can end all of this by getting behind the resistance. Save the entire country, the entire population of the country. Or you can focus on one Afghan, one desperate Afghan who is desperate to come out, and you're desperate to get him out.
It's a tough problem.
There's no easy answer, sir.
No. Well, I appreciate you taking it on, and I appreciate those of you watching. Hopefully we can have a responsible conversation around this. Hit me up. I want to know what you're thinking. And I know it's hard, but I think we have to have it. I think we have to have this conversation. We're wrapping here, Legend. What did we not talk about that you want to say either to our viewers, to the new administration, anything that you want to signal to the world, anything that we didn't cover here that you want to hit?
I think we covered right about everything, sir. And just one thing I would say, if you let me. From my heart, I'm very grateful for your friendship. Thank you for being a friend, a mentor, and for supporting me, standing with me, even when it got very tough. Thank you for helping me with the Sean Ryan show. A lot of people may not know you were actually with me when I did my Sean Ryan interview. For coming to Vienna, for getting the voice of the resistance leaders out there, the message, being a true friend of Afghanistan. I'm forever grateful to you, sir. And I will die in debt to you.
Well,
I can never pay you back, sir. And I love you very much.
Love you too, buddy. And it's an honor, man. It's an honor because of the guys on that wall behind us and this flag behind me. A lot of our friends that didn't make it home, and and I think it did matter. It was for something, and I think, and I'll say this, I'll end on this, is that I think that as T.E. Lawrence said, nothing is written, and I think that the days that Afghanistan, the better days, are still in front of us. And I think that the voices of resistance have yet to be heard. And a lot of those voices were made possible by the sacrifices of our brothers that went over there for 20 years and bled and gave it up so that that years later, Afghans could have their own voice in their own way. That makes a difference. And I believe it. I do. And I choose to believe it. And that's why I'm so adamant about this. And I just don't want to see another 9/11 at home. So thanks for standing up for that. Thanks to all of you for being part of this discussion. I know it's a tough one, but it's one that we have to have, and that we have to keep coming from the grassroots and getting as loud as we can in terms of advocacy, accountability, and forcing the narrative. Because if we don't, the outcome is just something that I don't think is acceptable for us as citizens, parents, and leaders. So thanks for your time. Thanks for what you do. Thanks to you, Legend, for being on.
Thank you, sir.
We'll see you on the rooftop.
The late Commander Amachar Massoud said, I'm quoting him, "The resistance continues."
And so it does. See you on the rooftop.